Hey everybody, so we've been talking about World War One here, and we haven't gotten the United States yet. Obviously, in 1914, 1916, U.S. is not fighting in World War One. We are saying, hey, we have a reason to join either side. Honestly, be honest with you, we have allegiances to the Triple Entente, we have allegiances to Germany, and other countries. We have no reason to join a war. It is like a long ways away. We're talking 1,000 miles away. We're talking, why bother with it? You know what I mean? And so, for the first part of World War One, United States stays neutral. And honestly, as we see images and those kind of things come out of the war, and we hear from immigrants, all kind of stuff going on, we're like, we don't want to deal with it. Why get involved in a war? It's not our problem. And actually, Woodrow Wilson, here's Woodrow Wilson, Woody as I call him. He made a promise to stay neutral. He's running for re-election while World War One was going on. And actually, his main platform, his main piece he had in his re-election campaign in 1916 was neutrality. Neutrality. The idea that he kept us out of the war. I mean, he runs against the Republican Party and he wins in a huge landslide. Personally, he was more open to join the war effort. Personally, he was, oh, hey, you know what? With the right opportunity, we'll join the war. But really, he wanted to be neutral as well. Why fight in a war we don't have to fight in? Now, while obviously the World War One part we're staying out of, there are issues we have ourselves back home here. And the guy was named Pancho Villa. He was a Mexican revolutionary. And it was happening in Mexico, and starting around 1910 or so, was a revolution to overthrow a caudillo, also the dictator. And eventually, as this whole revolution is taking place in Mexico, and there's a lot more to this, obviously, and I would love to be able to teach a whole class on Mexican history. I just don't have time for it here. And then as this revolution continues, there are two big leaders, Carranza and Pancho Villa. It ends up being basically a civil war between the two sides. Now, as part of that Roosevelt corollary, where we say that, hey, we can get involved in any Latin American country we see fit to get involved with, Woodrow Wilson does send U.S. ships to Mexico. He does it to support the U.S. interests down there and make sure that Mexico has a stable government. Well, as this revolution goes further on and we start seeing these different revolutionaries start competing with each other in Mexico, the U.S. starts supporting Pancho Villa's adversary, Carranza, more than Villa, because we want to see a stable government. And so Villa kind of starts his little revolutionary cavalry unit in the Chihuahua region, which is in the northern Mexico. And eventually, he actually leads raids into the United States, different sites in Texas, certain sites in New Mexico, a place where he actually attacks across the border and actually attacks U.S. territory. Trains, cities, raiding for supplies, that kind of stuff. In New Mexico, I think 17 people are killed in New Mexico. A few people are killed and wounded in Texas as part of his raids in the United States. Well, obviously, the U.S. can't, keep up with this, so the U.S. does send 5,000 troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to find Villa. They're led by General John Blackjack Pershing. They looked like cool names back then. They're sent to go fight the desert. Now, what's kind of cool about this, that this experience is one of the first times the United States uses mechanized vehicles in war. So they have motorcycles, trucks, and very early cars, those kind of things, and even very early airplanes like this one right here. They're being used by U.S. forces in Mexico or on the Mexican border, trying to help find Pancho Villa. I mean, honestly, guys, this is in 1916 here. We're talking 15, 16. The airplane was invented in 1903. This is 10 years after the first airplane was created, invented and tested at Kitty Hawk in 1903. So obviously, these are very new technologies we're talking about here. And the U.S. Army did, on occasion, go into Mexico, try and find and capture Pancho Villa. They never do, okay? And actually, a lot of Mexican people are very unhappy with the decision to, if you will, invade, into Mexico, try and find this guy. Villa is never captured, and he actually lives in Mexico until 1923 when he is actually assassinated after him and his rivals had made peace. But that's kind of what's going on in the U.S. during this whole time. The United States was benefiting from neutrality. Okay, we kind of see our imports and exports here for the United States. Notice 1914, 1917, we're making billions of dollars in exports and importing very, very little. I mean, we're selling stuff to both sides of this conflict, though we're mostly selling to the allies, the Triple Entente versus Central Power. So we're selling to Britain and France, Russia for the other side. But we're exporting all kinds of good stuff, bullets and guns and bombs, all those kind of things, and making tons of money off it. Now, actually, Britain had blockaded Germany. They had taken their big, huge honking navy and put them all up in front of Germany and said, okay, nobody's going to Germany. So we sold stuff to Britain, of course. Germany answered with their U-boats. Unterseeboot are submarines, what they wanted to were a German idea. It wasn't a German invention, but it was a tool used by Germany to try and stop shipping into Britain. They didn't have a big navy that could blockade off Britain because Britain had the biggest navy since they're an island, that kind of stuff. But the U-boats were able to work in the Atlantic Ocean and stop shipping. Now, some people, okay, one of the United States joined the war, some German immigrants, but most were actually against for neutrality. One thing that Germany starts, though, is something called unrestricted submarine warfare. Big topic. Make sure you guys write this one down, okay? And basically, Germany said that they're going to attack any ship carrying war goods into Great Britain or France. It didn't matter if that ship was Allied or not. So usually the rules of war read that you only shoot at ships that have the opposing side's flag on it. They said any ship that we think is carrying war materials into Britain or France, we're going to shoot, we're going to torpedo. Now remember, these ships can't be seen. I mean, they would, the submarines would stay underneath the water until they're ready, pop up, shoot torpedoes at these ships, and then sink back into the deep. They actually operated in wolf packs, they're called. So a group of submarines would work together, target these transport ships, and then send them down to the deep. And a lot of U.S. ships were actually attacked because of unrestricted submarine warfare. Now, eventually, we start using what's called the convoy system. You kind of see the convoy up here. We start putting some of our destroyers and cruisers around the transport ships. That way, they can kind of protect the transport ships from the submarines. Also, they started putting mines out, floating mines that were under the water that would, the submarines would sail through and touch the mines and blow up. And so we kind of see here as we go through the years, early on, how much is being sunk. Here it starts our downward trend. Okay, it goes right along with the convoys in 1917 we're starting. So basically, the convoys made it safer for these ships to go across the ocean and not be, hit by submarines. One of the ships that was attacked by a submarine was called the Lusitania. It was a British passenger liner, and it was traveling from U.S. back to Ireland, basically, and it was torpedoed by a U-boat off the coast of Ireland. Now, when the one torpedo hit this huge ship, not quite as big as Titanic, a little smaller than that, and one torpedo hit, all of a sudden the entire ship blew up and it sunk. We're talking like less than an hour. A total of 1,198 people were killed on the Lusitania, including 128 Americans. Now, the Germans said that the Lusitania was full of arms, of weapons, of bullets and guns and artillery shells being shipped from U.S. to England, being smuggled there. We didn't know. Nobody knew, right? Because obviously we didn't have the technology to go down to the very bottom and find it. And the idea was that, well, one torpedo hit the Lusitania, and then it exploded all the other shells in Lusitania, and that's why it exploded so fast. The question was, is this an act of war or not? Well, President Wilson said no military response. Instead, he issued a formal protest to Germany. And while he was doing this formal protest, 3 other American ships were actually sunk that had Americans on board. So now people start freaking out. By the way, Lusitania, we found out later on, did actually have weapons being smuggled, but whatever. Anyway, the thing that actually kind of brings us into the war is something called Zimmerman Note. Now, Zimmerman Note was a message that was sent to the United States, a telegram sent from Germany to the Mexican ambassador that had been intercepted by British code breakers. Now, these guys would all break different codes. And this actual copy of the telegram here, you can see it's all in these numbers here. And the British had actually tapped into the German and Mexican lines and were listening to the telegrams and copying them down and separating the code. Well, what the Zimmerman Note said was a message from Germany to Mexico saying, hey, Mexico, you know that land you guys lost to the United States back in the 1800s? You want to get it back? If you want to, we can help you out. What you do is you attack the United States, keep them out of the war, and we'll join you. We'll help you guys out. And then when the war is done, you'll be able to keep all that land that you had. Now, obviously, we're being given this by the British, so who knows if it's legit, not legit, whatever. But this gets released, and people start freaking out. And so we start seeing the United States join the war. Wilson actually has that telegram released, and it just enrages the public. And Wilson goes to Congress and says, hey, should we have a war? We should have a war. And so Congress debates for 3 days, actually. On April 6, 1917, the United States joins the war. Now, it was not exactly like the most, I wouldn't really call it like the most unanimous decision. I'm going to flip back to the slide in a second here. Here's the actual debate from Congress about World War I, the picture up here. But Congress actually debated for 3 days if we should go to war or not. And most people actually supported the war. most senators and congresspeople wanted to go to war. Senator Bob LaFollette from Wisconsin was actually one of the few that volunteered against the war. And actually, LaFollette catches a ton of heck for it. And he did it because all the German people that live in Wisconsin. It's like, well, we have a lot of people that have their cousins and brothers and parents and stuff still living in Germany. My constituency really can't have that happening. And actually, a lot of people turn on LaFollette and they call him Kaiser LaFollette, all that kind of nasty stuff. They call him because he supports. He says maybe we shouldn't go to Germany. Some other people said that Wilson just wanted to go to war to help the war industry make money because now you have to have all these guns and bullets, that kind of stuff, and it's going to make money for factories, those kind of things. Some people are also freaking out about trying to pay for the war. How are you going to pay for this? And we'll talk about how we pay for it in our next set of notes. One of the things the United States does right away, though, is starts a propaganda campaign. And so here we see posters like this being plastered around talking about the Germans. And they really focus on the Germans especially. They show the Germans here as being like these mad brutes and ape-like creatures, also those kind of things that's destroying all the good things in the world. And we'll look at this stuff next week as well. Now, the person sent to command this whole deal is General John Blackjack Pershing, the guy who was down in Mexico. He was the top U.S. general and had been dealing with Pancho Villa. He was given command of something called the U.S. First Expeditionary Force, or the AEF. It was American Expeditionary Force, the troops that would be sent to France. It was a non-official kind of battle kind of thing, but there are troops that are going to go to France. Now, when the war started, the United States had a very, very small army. We're talking less than 200,000 people to have available in the army. They need soldiers. And so they start something called the Selective Service Act. Essentially, it's the draft. And so you're put into a lottery. All people between the ages of 21 and 30 at the time, that's wrong guys, it's 30 not 20 on there, are eligible for the draft. It later changes to 18 to 45. And the lottery. So you give them a number, they call a number, and that then pulls you into the draft. And so in less than a year, the Army goes from having 200,000 people to having 4 million soldiers. Now here's what a soldier will look like in World War I. Notice a little different soldiers today. All wool uniform. You kind of see the rifle use, bolt action rifles. All the tools they would have in here and the campaign hat, that kind of stuff. And the nickname the U.S. soldiers got was Doughboys. They're called Doughboys, not because they were doughy or chubby or that kind of stuff, not because what they ate. It was because of the chalky dust that they would, poof up when marching and got over top of them because they marched a lot. And so actually a lot of U.S. soldiers actually liked that name of the Doughboys. And here's kind of shows some training from World War I and what it was like. You got a few weeks of basic training. You learn how to shoot, learn how to march, learn discipline, a lot of marching, miles of marching we're talking. And then you were sent off to war in France. One of the arguments originally was, should the U.S. just join units that are in France, or should they be their own separate units? And actually, they stayed in United States units. There are also African American soldiers sent to France as well, help out British and French, and we'll talk about that in a second. A lot of Americans were really in reserve, kind of backing up the French and the British. And as the war went on, they became kind of the new force to get involved in the fight. Now, there were African American soldiers. Well, here's some examples of African American soldiers that served in the war. Over 200,000 African American soldiers fought with the AEF in France. And they were in segregated units, so they're all African American units, all black units that had white officers. And so there was a lot of discrimination against them. Some went to go fight with French and English units, those kind of things. But actually, and we'll talk about some more detail in a later notes session, some of the African American units served with distinction. They were, really huge that way. And actually, there are other African units that they met up with that were fighting with French and British armies from their colonies. So it's kind of cool to see how this took place there. We'll look more at this later on. Also, women were brought into the service as well. Over 40,000 U.S. women served in World War I in a non-combat role. That being not fighting the trenches. So nurses, you can see the top picture up here with the Red Cross, ambulance drivers, interpreters. We see a lady here in uniform. This is happening both with British and French ladies as well. But and they also did more work at home, which we'll talk about in our next note session due next week as well. So a little snippet of that. Women also served in the Army as well. All right, guys, this is going to be due on Friday for us. Thanks a lot. We'll be doing a little debate on Friday. We're looking at the whole issue of U.S. and World War I with some debates about neutrality, and we'll talk to you guys then. Thanks a lot, guys. See you later.